and study it and apply it to our lives. And that's what we do as spiritual beings here in this human form. We are going through these principles on the alternate Sundays that I'm here, one at a time. The first three of the 5 universal principles lead us to an essential truth. No great spiritual teacher who ever lived, not Jesus Christ, not Moses, not Muhammad, not Gautama Buddha, not any manifestation of the goddess. None was more powerful, more strongly expressive of the infinite power of God than you are right now. Now, these way showers were not gentle souls with special powers. They were brave warriors in consciousness who made this spiritual truth of our oneness with the divine the central focus of their lives, wrestling with it constantly through the challenges and gifts, the shadows and the light of their individual human experiences. And I have to add that I would definitely include Dr. Martin Luther King among those special lights, wouldn't you? So that's why their lives are so important to us. They're examples for us all. This didn't make them wildly popular. Many people who were, even those who were initially drawn to them, were quickly disillusioned because these way showers were not doing it perfectly. The Buddha was a constant outcast. Moses, please, those people murmured against him every day. Jesus, we're told in the Gospels, became impatient often and lost his temper and made mistakes of judgment. He refused to fill the political role of Messiah, to which people were trying to push him. And so many of his followers abandoned him and his message when the going got tough. And in Luke particularly, he makes a point of saying that the numbers had started to fall off by the time they got to Jerusalem. One of my favorite analogies that Jesus uses, because it's just so evocative, I think, is a statement that you cannot put new wine into old wineskins. We cannot simply fit this dramatic new understanding into the old wineskins we've lived with so far. It won't work. We try. We very often try. We can't simply change some of the words, rearrange the furniture in our minds, and try to bring our old basic core beliefs of right and wrong, sin and punishment, into this new dimension. Instead of insisting that we and all others obey the rules as an attempt to please a distant God, we can't simply replace that understanding with rules that we have to live up to in order to perfectly express the Christ. And each is as stifling as the other. Both prevent us from ever even beginning to do the spiritual work that we are in fact here to do. We cause ourselves at least as much grief and shame. We create at least as much negative energy over those parts of us, those thoughts, actions, attitudes, emotions that don't seem to be appropriately Christ-like as we once tried to live up to our new set of rules. We judge ourselves, we judge others by these new standards as eagerly and harshly as we used to judge ourselves in terms of venial and mortal sins, right? Remember that? Remember those? The fourth spiritual principle helps us to handle that shift in consciousness. It is our spiritual contract to express the Christ. Now, if perfection were required, then the already perfect light and love of God would never have needed to express as the Christ in the first place. We are expressing from perfection. We don't have to worry about achieving it, earning it, or attaining it. Our spiritual contract, how many times have we talked about this here, is not to be obedient. Our spiritual contract is to be creative. And creation, by its very definition, cannot be perfect. You can't create by quietly sitting in the light, affirming positive thoughts. You must wrestle with light and shadow. You must make choices and then make different choices and learn from different results. Think of Dr. King. You know, if he had just sat quietly and thoughts of freedom, he would be no less a spiritual being, he would be no less powerful, but he would not have fulfilled his spiritual purpose. His contract was to bring the Christ energy awareness to all of us. We have agreed to be imperfect in our human experiences because God needs us to be imperfect. And I think, I suggest as your affirmation for the week, it is my sacred contract to live in a state of divine imperfection. I think so. I have been using this week, and I tell you, it's very powerful. It's very relaxing. It's very loving. It is my sacred contract to live in a state of divine imperfection. So if I make mistakes, they're divine. That's divine imperfection. I'm here to learn from those mistakes, to make new choices so that those choices can more fully express the Christ. Perfection, after all, is the truth of who we are. We don't have to work to achieve perfection. Obey the rules, color inside the lines, recognize yourself as a weak and willful sinner, and avoid anything that has even the suggestion of the shadow to it. Live a quiet, sheltered life, and at the end, you may well feel that you are pretty close to perfection. Other people may feel you are pretty close to perfection. But you will have failed at your spiritual contract, or at least you will have delayed it, possibly until another lifetime. We have to be imperfect. We are here to be imperfect, and so is everybody else. That's why Jesus was so insistent that we not judge ourselves or each other. We're not here to apply standards and judge how well we fit them. The minute we find ourselves judging ourselves or others, we are freezing any chance of using that moment to fulfill our sacred contract. The moment I judge that there's something wrong with where I am or what I'm doing, I freeze the opportunity to make that a part of my contract. Please remember that judgment is different from discernment. Judgment has strong emotion attached. Discernment is simply the energy of making a choice. And this is the awareness we now bring to the fourth principle. Prayer is creative thinking that heightens the connection with God-mind and therefore brings forth wisdom, healing, prosperity, and everything good. Now this is a very different definition of prayer than we've been taught as we grew up. What we grew up with is beseeching prayer. It was centered in a consciousness of lack. I need something, I need God to fulfill a lack in my life of some kind. So I will pray for it and hope that God, wherever God is, will hear my prayer and will give me something which God is withholding at the moment. You see how false that whole line of thinking is. God is an energy of infinite love that could never withhold. It could never withhold. So, we beseech a distant being named God, or we beseech the indwelling Christ nature. We can do that when we get a little bit more advanced. We can stop praying to a God out there and start praying to our own Christ nature. And please express as both create a sense of duality that is inconsistent with our first principle. One presence, one power. So it's a beautifully written statement. Prayer is creative thinking. We are not asking for a favor or asking for a manifestation. We are choosing to create. Prayer is a statement of creative intention. We are not requesting, we are bringing forth, as the words in the statement say. I don't entirely like the word connection with divine mind, because connection creates a sense of duality. You have to be connected to something else. And there is nothing else. There's only God in expression. We can't be connected to what we already are. But that's just me, and that's just an aside. In unity, we call this expression of creative intention affirmative prayer. We focus in consciousness by affirming spiritual truth. Then we create from that heightened consciousness. This forms a template we can use for an infinite variety of things. Prayer is and should be very simple. Meditation should be very simple. Why? Because you don't want to engage your mortal mind. You want to quiet your mortal mind down, relax it, put it to sleep, hypnotize it somehow, so that you can be with your spiritual self. And the more words there are, the more the mortal mind gets involved. So it's finding a balance there. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the 4T's prosperity program. No? Yeah, one. It's been taught by Unity for about 25 or so years now. It was developed by the late Stretton Smith, who was a Unity minister, largely in Hawaii and California, and was a great friend, by the way. It includes a 3-column prayer template that both affirms spiritual truth and states a creative intention. I cannot tell you how often I use this template when I'm being asked to create a prayer, when I'm being asked to spontaneously share a prayer with somebody. It's wonderful to have a template you can fall back on so that you can get relaxed with the template and then fill in the blanks, so to speak. The first column, it's 3-column prayer. The first column states the nature of the divine I'm evoking. The love of God, for example, or the presence of God, or the power of God. Whatever I'm calling upon. The second column is where. It might be in you, it might be in me, it might be in the world. Where am I calling, where am I evoking this power? This creates a focus for my creative intention, and the third column states that creative intention is healing you now, perhaps, or is prospering me now, or dissolves negative energies in the world. There is no prayer intention that is too big for your consciousness. None. So the Christ in me expresses as prosperity for me now. The Christ in you is healing you now. I may choose to elaborate on that and use a few more words, I usually do, but that's the structure of it. The Christ in you is healing you now. That's what Jesus used all the time. I have not healed you. You have healed yourself. The Christ in you is healing you now. And I affirm that, and by affirming it, I help you express it. I help dissolve the resistance to that so that you can more fully express in your life. Yeah? So, 3-column prayer. The nature of the divine, the power of God, the presence of God, the love of God, the location that I'm focusing on in you, in me, in all the world. It can be anything. So the power of God in the world is healing us now. of war and conflict. Simple prayer, infinitely powerful. There's nothing more we need to say. We certainly can say much more. We can describe the world that we're choosing to change. But there's no need. There's only that basic structure. That's the prayer. So effective prayer is not a request. It is a statement of creative intention. A statement of creative intention. And that's why, as our statement says, that brings forth wisdom, health, prosperity, and everything good. It just does that. Prayer isn't necessarily something you sit and set some time apart for. Prayer is how you make the choices in your life. The power of God within me is choosing to have a donut this morning. Absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. I love to remember Ken Wapnick from when in the early days of Course in Miracles, who knew Helen Shackman and worked with her, and he said she called upon Jesus for everything. He was shopping with her once for napkins, and she asked Jesus which napkins she should buy. You know, that's the kind of confidence and love that we have the opportunity to express in our lives.
So can I just ask you for clarification? So let's just say the power of God is healing me now, and then what comes after that?
No, the power of God in me.
The power of God in me.
The nature of God, the location, the focus, and then the intention. Nature, focus, intention.
Okay, so can you say an example just so I get it?
So the presence of God within you is expressing as clarity and love. Okay?
Okay.
The nature, the location, the focus,
Nature,
and
the location, the
then
focus,
the intention.
Okay.
Yeah. But, of course, as James said, the Apostle James said in his epistle, faith without works is dead. This brings us, of course, to the fifth principle, and that will be our focus in 2 weeks. And I must say that, judging from some of the spontaneous announcements this morning, it seems to be your focus for many of you in between now and then, so you may have some interesting sharing on expressing this principle into the world. In the meantime, try the 3-column prayer structure, whether you're praying for yourself or for others. Feel the creative power of structured, affirmative prayer. Don't feel like you've got to find the right words or there's a magic word you have to stumble across somehow. Keep it simple. Intend it. Know its truth. And watch what happens. It doesn't mean you're going to transform the world, you're going to heal all your friends. But it means you will know that you have been a healer in that moment, if that's your intention. You will know that you have touched someone else's consciousness, that you've helped to raise it, or you've raised your own for whatever purpose you are calling upon at that moment. Any other questions before we close this? Yeah.
Well, it's just a reminder of what you said about the woman with the napkins, because I read one time of a woman that said, for example, she brought it into the mundane, like she was cooking, she always cooked, say she was frying pork chops or something. She always called on help to fry her pork chop, not just, I do it with driving, I have an issue with driving. I have to call the divine into driving.
I do too.
Absolutely.
I do too. Almost every time I get in the car, this car is God's car. That's an affirmation and unity that I use a lot, you know. Keep me safe. Yeah. There's nothing too small, you see. Everything is of equal value because everything is God expressing. So you don't have to think, well, this isn't important enough to pray about. I'll just try to struggle through myself. Well, what nonsense. Take a moment, use the 3 structured prayer, decide what the nature of God you need to call upon in that moment within you, and then what you want that to achieve, what you want that nature to achieve, how you want it to express in your life. You're going to find it makes a difference if you try this. It's a simple, powerful structure, and I hope it's been useful this morning, and I hope you'll find it useful during the week. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
What about the idea with the prayer that it is complete right from the start?
That you're calling upon the wholeness, in other words.
That the belief that as I'm praying, it's done.
Sure. Well, that's what what the structure does, I think.
Do you,
The presence of God in you expresses as healing now. It's done. I don't have it. It expresses as healing next Tuesday after you get your exams. No, it's done now. It's immediate.
so are you saying, should you say at the end, is it done? Is that your question?
No.
No, just,
Sometimes when I pray, I tend to fall back into what I prayed about and wondering why it's still going wrong, or picking up more pieces of it, or assembling more pieces of it. Middle East, let's just take that for an example. That I take more in on it, and it doesn't feel like the prayer is complete.
Well, there's the difference between sort of studying and praying. Your mortal mind is fascinated by what's happening in the Middle East and all the intricacies of it and all the details of it and the sorrow of it and the deaths of it. Your Christ mind simply wants to know what you want to create. So I don't affirm that while I pray there is peace in the Middle East, but I affirm that I am creating peace in the Middle East to the extent that I can, to the extent that it is being received. Because I can't force peace on people who are locked up in conflict. I can't. I can strengthen those whose minds have already turned to peace. There's going to be resistance. If someone is resistant to healing, they're going to do it their way. They'll trust the doctors, they'll trust the pills, and that's fine. But your energy finds those who are open to knowing the truth about themselves, and it strengthens that knowing, it strengthens that truth. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you're praying for something internal that then creates something external by what it puts out into the world, not praying for something external to happen, like...
Well, I'm not praying for anything. I'm praying knowing.
Okay.
I'm praying choosing. I choose that. The power of God in me expresses now as peace in the world. I don't have to worry about how that's going to happen, or where it's going to happen, or where it should happen, or who's open to it or who's not. That's my creative choice. And it will empower the Middle East. I tell you, I swear to you. Well, look, you people sent me to Jerusalem. You sent me to the Golan Heights. And people all around the planet, thousands and thousands of people were joining us in prayer at that very moment. And you could feel it. You could truly, absolutely feel it. And for the length of time we were there in meditation, there was not a shot to be heard. And the minute we stopped, gunfire started in the villages beneath us. So yes, prayer is very, very important, very, very powerful.
and if one has any resistance, how does one work with that? What would one do?
Resistance to prayer?
Well, no, I'm just saying if you've, say, had a condition for a long time and you're, sometimes I don't know, like you can be getting something out of it or something, and if you feel that you have some, let's say, resistance to healing, part of you wants to heal.
Well, that's fine.
How do you work with the resistance to move through it?
You don't have to work with it. You can repeat the prayer. Prayer isn't necessarily a one-time thing. If your mortal mind is resistant, then take more time to still it, to quiet it, and pray.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's about strengthening your awareness of spirit mind as opposed to or up against the awareness of mortal mind, which is, as you said, which is very busy.
Well, that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. Happy praying.